Welcome to another tale of intrigue, shadow, and revelation. Tonight, we journey to custom location in the waning days of the 1920s, 1930s custom era. A land where the air is heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth, where the hollow echo of a drum carried upon the wind will mark not festivity, but murder. The evening is hushed, save for the distant rolling of thunder. Inside a great house, beneath its oak beams and candlelit corridors, guests gather. Laughter masks unease, and beneath the veneer of civility, tensions coil like serpents awaiting their strike. And it is here, dear listener, that we discover the riddle most singular. The enigma of the hollow drum. Join us. Watch closely. Listen closer, for nothing escapes the keen eyes or the little gray cells of Monsieur Hercule Poirot. Chapter 1. A Gathering at Hollow Drum Manor. The rain fell in steady, mournful sheets upon the countryside, as though the heavens themselves had resolved to scour the earth of its sins. Along the winding lane that led to Hollow Drum Manor, the lamps of a motor car bobbed and swayed like the eyes of a restless phantom. The road, slick with autumnal mud, gleamed faintly beneath the sporadic crack of lightning that rent the sky. To the right, fields lay drenched and forlorn, the hedgerows sagging beneath their watery burden. To the left, a dark copse of trees rose up like sentinels, their branches rattling like bones in the unceasing gale. Hercule Poirot sat comfortably in the rear seat of the car, his gloved hands folded neatly over a walking cane of polished ebony. His immaculate mustaches twitched with every jolt of the wheels against the uneven track, but his expression was one of supreme serenity. He was dressed, as ever, with a precision bordering upon the mathematical, his gray suit pressed to perfection, his shoes gleaming though the weather beyond promised ruination to lesser men's attire. Beside him sat his loyal companion. Trust you to find philosophy in a rainstorm. I merely wish we were at the hearth with a whiskey, instead of splashing about on these God-forsaken roads. The car lurched to a halt before the great oak doors of Hollow Drum Manor. The building stood square and formidable against the elements, its central courtyard dimly visible through an archway in the middle of the facade. Even from the car, Poirot could hear it, the strange echo that gave the place its name. The rain, striking the flagstones within the hollow quadrangle, reverberated with a resonance that was neither natural nor wholly explicable. It was as though one heard, faint and distant, the sonorous thrum of a giant drum. The butler, a gaunt man whose cheeks had the pallor of wax, ushered them quickly inside. They were relieved at once by the warmth of the hall, where logs roared upon the hearth, and the scent of polish mingled with that of roasting meats from the kitchens. Poirot, ever fastidious, straightened his tie and smoothed his mustaches before presenting his card upon a silver tray. Messieurs Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings, the butler intoned with sepulchral dignity, before leading them toward the drawing room. It was there they encountered the assembled company, those who before the night was out would find themselves entangled in a web of suspicion, secrets, and, ultimately, death. Sir Reginald Whitcomb himself stood near the mantelpiece, a glass of port in hand. He was a man of 60, stout of build, with a florid complexion and a manner of effortless authority. His graying hair was swept back with military precision, and his eyes, blue and sharp, possessed that particular arrogance of the successful industrialist, accustomed to command and to be obeyed. Beside him, though not close enough to suggest affection, stood Lady Eleanor Whitcomb. She was tall, almost statuesque, her pale face framed by raven hair that bore no trace of gray. Her gown, of dark velvet, clung to her with severe elegance, and her posture was one of impeccable composure. Yet there was an icy to wealth, perhaps, or the proud poverty of one dedicated to art. She acknowledged the visitors with a quick, warm smile, though her gaze soon returned to the keys beneath her hands, as though she feared the loss of inspiration. Colonel Arthur Pembroke stood by the window, mustached and upright, his frame still imposing despite advancing years. He bore the easy swagger of the retired officer, his laughter too loud, his gestures too emphatic. Yet there was about him also a nervousness, betrayed by the incessant fiddling with his cufflinks and the darting of his eyes towards Sir Reginald. Finally, by the bookcase, half in shadow, sat Dr. Margaret Vale. A woman of middle years, with an air of calm competence, she wore her dark hair simply, her spectacles perched precisely upon the bridge of her nose. She greeted Poirot and Hastings with professional courtesy, her handshake firm, her eyes coolly appraising. She was the family physician, and in her expression there lingered a reserve that might have been discretion or concealment. Introductions were made, and the party resumed its various stations. The room filled with conversation, punctuated now and again by the hollow boom from the courtyard. Poirot, ever attentive, noted how each person reacted to that peculiar sound. Eleanor's lips tightened. Charlotte's drumming grew louder. Beatrice's hands faltered momentarily on the keys. The colonel laughed a trifle too heartily, and Dr. Vale's eyes flicked up from her book with a quickness that belied indifference. Sir Reginald, with hearty joviality, announced, "We shall to dinner presently. Poirot, I am delighted you could join us. I have long desired the pleasure of your company. They tell me you have a gift for unraveling enigmas. Well, you shall find none here, I promise you. Hollow Drum Manor is as sound as my accounts." Poirot inclined his head modestly. "I am honored, monsieur. But one never knows, n'est-ce pas? It is often in the houses that appear most sound that the cracks are deepest." Sir Reginald laughed loudly, though his wife did not. Dinner was announced, for the most part. Observed the shifting play of expressions. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she raised her glass. Charles bit his lip and colored at his uncle's jibe. Beatrice's eyes flashed with indignation before she lowered them. The colonel forced a booming laugh but toyed nervously with his fork. Dr. Vale alone remained impassive, though her lips compressed almost imperceptibly. The hollow drum of the courtyard echoed again, louder now, as though mocking the uneasy harmony of the dinner. Sir Reginald raised his glass in a toast. "To Hollow Drum Manor, may it outlast us all." The guests echoed the sentiment dutifully, but Poirot, watching closely, noted that none of them met Sir Reginald's eye as they drank. When the ladies withdrew to the drawing-room, the men lingered over port and cigars. Hastings, ever gregarious, exchanged stories with the colonel, while Charles sulked in silence. Sir Reginald, flushed with wine, turned to Poirot. "Tell me, monsieur, do you believe every man has secrets?" Poirot smiled gently. Mais oui, monsieur. It is the nature of humanity. Even the most innocent conceals something, the wish unspoken, the thought suppressed. And it is these little secrets that make life so interesting. Sir Reginald chuckled. Perhaps one day I shall tell you mine. But not tonight. No, tonight I am invincible. He raised his glass, his laughter booming as loudly as the echo that followed from the courtyard. Poirot's eyes lingered upon him, thoughtful, as though he beheld not merely a man but the shadow of an inevitable fate. The evening wound on. Music drifted faintly from the piano where Beatrice played, though her melodies were tinged with melancholy. Eleanor conversed quietly with Dr. Vale by the fire. Charles paced restlessly, his hand often straying to the pocket where, Poirot suspected, lay an unpaid bill or a desperate letter. The colonel told yet another tale of daring, though his eyes betrayed distraction. And always, from beyond the walls, came the drum. Hollow, resonant degrees of eagerness. Lady Eleanor arranged her gown with deliberate elegance before lowering herself into the high-backed chair at Sir Reginald's right hand. Charles Danforth sprawled at the opposite end, careless of form, his tie askew and his golden hair falling over his brow. The colonel thumped into his seat with military briskness, his heavy mustaches twitching as he surveyed the array of dishes. Beatrice Lyle took her place beside him, folding her napkin with hands that trembled slightly. Dr. Margaret Vale, cool and precise, sat at Sir Reginald's left, her spectacles catching the candlelight in two cold sparks. Poirot and Hastings were seated midway along the table, afforded a view of each guest and, more importantly to Poirot, a vantage of their interactions. He surveyed them with the same calm attention he might devote to the arrangement of flowers, noting which elements harmonized, which clashed, and which concealed thorns beneath their petals. The meal began with turtle soup, its savory aroma filling the hall. Servants moved silently, their faces expressionless, though even in them Poirot perceived a tension, as though the atmosphere of the house itself seeped into the bones of all who dwelt within its walls. Sir Reginald raised his spoon and glanced around with a lordly air. "Come now," he declared, "let us have lively conversation. We are not monks at a silent supper. Charles, what of the horses you backed at Ascot? Still bleeding money, I presume." Charles' face colored, and he muttered into his soup. "One must take risks, uncle. Fortune favors the brave." "Fortune favors the prudent," Sir Reginald retorted with a booming laugh. "And you, my boy, are anything but. You shall squander your inheritance long before you see it, if indeed you see it at all." A ripple of discomfort passed along the table. Lady Eleanor's lips compressed into a thin line. Beatrice glanced quickly at Charles, her eyes filled with sympathy, before lowering them once more. The colonel, eager to dispel the awkwardness, barked, "Well said, Reginald. Ha! A man ought to stand on his own 2 feet. But he, the mother of success." Sir Reginald chuckled. "Perseverance may be the mother of success, but delusion is its poor relation. You would do well to remember it." Beatrice's cheeks flamed, yet she forced a smile. Poirot, ever attentive, marked the tightening of her jaw. The glisten of unshed tears quickly vanished. It was not the rebuke of a patron she endured. It was the humiliation of a tyrant. The meat course arrived. Roast pheasant with trimmings. The air thickened with the aroma of herbs and game. Sir Reginald carved with relish, sending slices down the table. As the plates filled, conversation faltered, each guest wary of attracting his barbs. But Sir Reginald, unappeased by silence, turned now to the Colonel. "And you, Arthur, still spinning your yarns of heroism? Tell me, how many times did you save the Empire single-handedly? A dozen? A score? Or was it all smoke and no fire?" The Colonel's face purpled beneath his mustaches. He gave a strained laugh. "By Jove, Reginald, you've a tongue sharper than any saber. I did my bit, as you know well." "Your bit," Reginald sneered, "was to squander investments after the war. You would have bankrupted yourself had I not intervened. Do not mistake gratitude for merit, old friend." The Colonel muttered something inaudible and thrust another forkful of pheasant into his mouth. His laughter had vanished, replaced by a brooding silence. Poirot glanced at Hastings, who shifted uncomfortably. Hastings leaned close and whispered, "The fellow's insufferable. One wonders why any of them remain under his roof." Poirot's lips curved faintly. "Mon ami, people remain where interest binds them, even when affection does not. And interest, it may take many forms." Dessert followed, a magnificent trifle, layered with fruit and cream. Lady Eleanor ate delicately, her expression unreadable. Sir Reginald turned his gaze upon her at last. "And what of you, my dear wife? Still as frigid as the Alps? One might think you carved from marble, so floor." Beatrice cast Charles a glance of mingled concern and pity before following Eleanor and Dr. Vale. Charles poured himself another glass of port, his hand trembling slightly. "Curse the old man," he muttered, scarcely audible. "One day he shall choke on his own arrogance." Poirot raised his brows but said nothing. The men lingered. Cigars were lit, the room filled with smoke. Hastings, ever eager for camaraderie, drew the Colonel into conversation. Charles sat glowering, silent save for the clink of his glass. Sir Reginald, expansive now with wine, leaned toward Poirot. "You observe, monsieur, how I keep them all in line. A strong hand. That is what such people require. Left to themselves, they would flounder. Eleanor with her icy disdain, Charles with his foolish debts, Beatrice with her airs, Arthur with his empty boasts, Margaret with her endless meddling. They are all nothing without me. I am the center, the pillar. They despise me, of course, but they cannot do without me." Poirot inclined his head gravely. "It is a heavy burden, monsieur, to be the pillar. One wonders, what happens when the pillar falls?" Reginald laughed, loud and long, his glass sloshing over. "Ha! That day shall never come, Monsieur Poirot. I am invincible, invincible." The echo from the courtyard boomed once more, hollow and portentous, as though the house itself disagreed. Later, when the gentlemen joined the ladies in the drawing-room, Beatrice resumed her place at the piano. Yet the music she played was not light or festive, but a minor melody, mournful and strange, filled with dissonance. Charles paced restlessly, his agitation mounting. Eleanor sat in regal silence, her eyes fixed upon the fire. The Colonel forced laughter but spoke little. Dr. Vale read quietly, though her eyes seldom moved across the page. Poirot, in his armchair, folded his hands and closed his eyes as though dozing. In truth, his mind was acute, cataloging each tremor of voice, each flicker of expression, each silence more eloquent than speech. The storm garment stretched beyond comfort. Sir Reginald's mockery, His wife's icy retorts, Charles' brooding silence, the colonel's forced cheer, Beatrice's subdued melancholy, and Dr. Vale's cool reserve. All these had thickened the atmosphere with a heaviness more suffocating than the weather itself. Even Hastings, usually the most optimistic of souls, had fallen quiet, sensing the peculiar discord that hung in the air. Poirot, however, sat serene in the drawing room, his neat shoes crossed at the ankle, his hands folded as though in prayer, his eyes bright beneath half-lowered lids. To Hastings he might have appeared drowsy, but in truth his mind was recording every detail. The rhythm of footsteps on the carpet, the tremor in a voice, the fleeting glance that betrayed far more than words. At 1:45, Lady Eleanor rose with graceful dignity. "If you will excuse me," she said coolly, "I find the storm fatiguing. I shall retire." Dr. Vale followed soon after, murmuring something of the early hour she must keep with her patients. Beatrice lingered at the piano until a particularly violent crack of thunder made her falter. She gave a hasty bow and left the room. Charles remained a while, his eyes fixed moodily upon the empty hearth, until at last, muttering something about a nightcap, he stalked off toward the library. That left only the colonel, who attempted to regale Hastings with tales of cavalry charges and bivouacs, though his voice trembled now and again, betraying an unease he sought to conceal. Sir Reginald, half-drunk and flushed, stretched in his chair and laughed. "Look at them scatter, eh, Poirot? Like rabbits before a storm. They fear the thunder, the shadows, the echo of the drum. Nonsense. Superstition. It is nothing more than the peculiar acoustics of this house, yet they quake as though the devil himself were pacing the courtyard." Poirot smiled faintly. "Perhaps, monsieur, it is not the thunder nor the echo that they fear, but something nearer, more intimate." Reginald frowned. "Very foundations of the house. It rolled through the corridors, pulsed in the walls, thudded in the chest like the beat of some monstrous drum. And then, almost immediately, a scream. A scream shrill, terrible, unearthly, cutting through the storm like a knife. Hastings sprang from his bed. He seized his dressing gown and flung open the door. Other doors opened almost simultaneously, Charles' face pale with shock, Beatrice clutching a shawl around her shoulders, Eleanor rigid with fright, the colonel thundering into the corridor, Dr. Vale, composed but white-lipped. Poirot, immaculate even in his night attire, appeared from his chamber with his usual calm. He raised a hand for silence. "Mes amis, attendez." The sound, it came from the courtyard. Together they hurried down the wide staircase, the servants following in alarm. The great hall seemed cavernous, its shadows alive with menace. Through the archway they passed into the central courtyard, where the rain poured mercilessly upon stone and fountain alike. Lightning flashed, and in its momentary brilliance they saw the horror that awaited them. Sir Reginald Whitcomb lay sprawled upon the wet flagstones, beside the drum-shaped fountain. His arms were flung wide, his face upturned to the deluge. A dark wound gaped upon his temple, glistening with blood that mingled with the rainwater, trickling into the grooves of the stone. His eyes stared glassily at the heavens, unseeing. Beatrice gave a cry and covered her face. Charles uttered a curse, his voice hoarse with shock. The colonel exclaimed, "By Jove!" and knelt, but Poirot held him back with a firm hand. "Ne touchez pas. Do not touch the body. He is beyond aid. Dr. Vale crouched beside the corpse, her hand hovering above the wound but not quite daring to make contact. "Yes," she said at last, her voice low, clinical. "He is dead. Killed by a single blow, delivered with great force." Poirot's eyes darted across the scene. He noted the fountain's bronze basin vibrating faintly with each drop of rain, its hollow resonance lingering in the air. The lightning. The colonel's mustaches twitched with suppressed agitation, and Dr. Vallet's eyes glinted strangely behind her spectacles. Poirot raised his hand. "Mesdames, messieurs, the hour has struck. Sir Reginald Whitcomb has been murdered. And until the truth is discovered, each of you remains, how do you say, under suspicion." The thunder roared in answer, and the hollow drum of the fountain echoed once more as though mocking the solemn declaration. The body was borne indoors, laid upon a bier in the library until the constables could attend. Poirot remained in the courtyard a few moments longer, Hastings at his side. "What do you make of it, Poirot?" Hastings whispered, his face pale. Poor old Reginald, struck down in his own house. Poirot's eyes glimmered in the darkness. "Do you not hear it, Hastings? The drum. It does not merely echo, it deceives. The sound, it misleads. One cannot be certain when it began, nor from whence it comes. And so it shall be with this crime. There is the appearance, and there is the truth. We must distinguish between them, mon ami." He held up the sodden scrap of velvet. And behold, the victim. He clutched at his assailant. "The fabric tells us a story, though as yet we do not know its ending." They returned inside, where the company had gathered in the drawing room, whispering in fear. Poirot entered with grave dignity, his presence commanding attention. "Until the police arrive," he said, "I shall take charge. Each of you must remain here. There shall be no wandering, no concealment. The murderer is among us, mes amis, and he believes himself clever. But Hercule Poirot assures you, he shall not remain concealed for long." His words fell heavy, final, and in their echo the company sat in uneasy silence, listening once more to the relentless thunder, the ceaseless rain, and the hollow beat of the drum. Chapter 4. Poirot Takes Command. The grandfather clock in the hall had just struck midnight when Poirot, candle in hand, returned to the library where "Grey cells shall speak for you." Hastings shifted uncomfortably. "It's beastly, Poirot. Absolutely beastly. Who could have done such a thing? In his own house, no less." Poirot raised his hand for patience. "All will be revealed, Hastings, in time. But first we must attend to the facts." He leaned closer to the body, adjusting the towel delicately to examine the wound. The blow had been delivered with precision and great force, enough to shatter bone, yet not so clumsy as to suggest blind rage. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "A single strike," he murmured. "Always, it is most telling. It speaks of control, of deliberation. This was not the frenzy of passion, mon ami. It was the act of one who planned." Hastings bent closer, though he quickly drew back with a shudder. "I dare say you're right. But what was the weapon? Surely not the fountain itself." Poirot shook his head. "No, no. The wound, it is blunt, yes, but not from stone. It is from some object, heavy, yet portable. A club, a mallet, perhaps." He glanced about the room, as though the very walls might yield their secrets. "And yet, where is it?" always the weapon. It tells a tale. But it is missing. He turned back to the corpse and raised Sir Reginald's stiffened hand, still clenched around the sodden scrap of fabric. Poirot held it up to the candlelight, the velvet glistening darkly where rain had soaked it through. "Observe, Hastings." He struggled. He tore this fragment from his assailant. But from whom? Hastings peered closer. "It looks like a piece of a gown, perhaps. Lady Eleanor's dress was velvet, was it not?" Poirot's mustaches twitched. "Ah, but you are too quick, mon ami. Lady Eleanor's gown, it was of velvet, yes, but of a darker shade, more green than black. And the weave, Hastings, the weave is different. No, this is not from her attire." Hastings frowned. "Then from what, Poirot?" "That, Hastings, we must discover." Beatrice sat in a corner, her face pale, her gaze fixed upon her trembling hands. The colonel stood rigidly, his jaw clenched, his mustaches bristling, while Dr. Vale leaned against the mantel, her arms folded, her expression one of cold defiance. Poirot entered with calm authority. "Mesdames, messieurs, I beg your indulgence. Until the constabulary arrive, it falls to me to preserve order. I must ask you to remain here, save when I call upon you. The murderer, yes, I say it plainly, is among us, and he, or she, believes that in the chaos of the storm the truth shall be concealed. But no, the little gray cells, they do not sleep." A murmur of protest rose, but Poirot lifted his hand. "No, I make no accusations, not yet. But I shall require each of you to speak with me, one by one. And I beg you, conceal nothing, even the smallest detail. It may be of consequence." He turned first to Lady Eleanor. In the library, under the wavering candlelight, Poirot conducted his first interview. Lady Eleanor sat with her back straight, her chin raised, her eyes cool as steel. "You were the first to retire this evening, madame." Poirot began gently. "At what hour precisely did you leave the drawing room?" "12:15, she replied calmly. "I went directly to my chamber. I did not leave it until summoned by the scream." "Did you hear the sound of the drum at midnight?" "I did," she said. "I thought it merely the storm." Poirot studied her face. "Your marriage to Sir Reginald. Pardon me, madame. Was it a happy one?" Her lips curved into the faintest smile, devoid of warmth. "Happy? No, Monsieur Poirot. But it was tolerable. He had his amusements, I had mine. I endured him, as one endures the weather, and yet," Poirot said softly, "his words tonight, they were cruel. He mocked you before all." A flicker passed across her eyes, but her voice clutched her shawl tightly, her eyes glistening with suppressed tears. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said gently, "you played the piano this evening. Until what hour?" Until nearly 12. Then I retired. I heard the dreadful boom, but I thought it part of the storm. And then the scream. You and Sir Reginald, you were not on good terms." Beatrice bit her lip. "He was cruel to me. He promised to sponsor my career, but he mocked me instead. He said I had no talent. But I bore it. I would never. Her voice broke. Poirot leaned closer. Courage, mademoiselle. It is not the innocent who need fear the truth. Colonel Pembroke followed, his boots echoing upon the floor. He stood stiffly, his hands behind his back. Colonel, you were also in the drawing room until near midnight? Indeed, yes. Reginald and I had words, as you saw. He enjoyed his little jests, but when the ladies went up, I smoked a cigar, then retired. You told Hastings you heard the drum before the scream. The colonel hesitated. Yes, a queer sound it was, like a great hollow boom. It seemed to linger. Then came the scream. I swear it, Poirot. I was in my chamber by then. Poirot's gaze sharpened. You had debts, did you not, Colonel? And Sir Reginald refused further aid. The colonel flushed beneath his mustaches. Damn it, yes, he cut me off. But by heaven, man, I did not kill him. At last Dr. Vale entered. She moved with composure, her face calm, her eyes steady behind the glint of her spectacles. Doctor, Poirot said, you attended the body. What is your opinion of the wound? A single blow, she replied, delivered with a blunt instrument. Instantaneous death. You retired early, I believe. Yes, at 11:45. I went directly to my room. And yet you returned swiftly at the scream. Very swiftly. She inclined her head. I am a physician, does something. Poirot stroked his mustaches. Ah, yes, the velvet. It is not from Lady Eleanor, as you thought. No, it belongs elsewhere. And when I find to whom, Hastings, the drum shall no longer deceive. He leaned back, closing his eyes, the faintest smile curving his lips. The murderer believes himself clever, but Hercule Poirot will be cleverer still. Outside, the storm thundered on, and the hollow drum beat its endless echo. Chapter 5. The Candlestick in the Shadows. The storm did not abate with the turning of the hour. Indeed, as dawn crept reluctantly toward the horizon, its fury only deepened. The windows rattled in their frames, the chimneys moaned with each blast of wind, and the courtyard fountain throbbed with that ceaseless hollow resonance that had already become a sinister refrain in the minds of all within Hollow Drum Manor. Poirot had not slept. The others, Lady Eleanor, Charles, Beatrice, the Colonel, and Dr. Vale, had been permitted to retire to their chambers after the long series of interviews. But Poirot remained in the library, his small figure bent neatly in a chair, his hands pressed together in that familiar steeple, his green eyes half closed, yet wakeful as a cat at watch. Hastings, slumped nearby, had at last dozed fitfully, though his dreams were troubled with visions of velvet scraps, booming drums, and faceless assassins lurking in the rain. At 6:30, as the first gray light filtered through the rain-streaked panes, Poirot roused himself. He rose, adjusted his tie with care, and tapped Hastings on the shoulder. Mon ami, awake. The hour for sleeping has passed. Already the murderer may be seeking to conceal what must not be found. Hastings blinked blearily. Good Lord, Poirot. I swear you don't need rest at all. What time is it? 6:30, Hastings. And already I feel the truth stirring. Poirot's mustaches twitched. Come. We shall take a little promenade through the manor before the household awakes. It is in the early hours, when guilt still trembles and plots unravel, that one finds the traces most telling. The corridors were silent, save for the groan of the timbers in the wind. Candles flickered in their sconces, and the shadows of the carved panels seemed to leer as Poirot and Hastings passed. Poirot paused often, his sharp eyes noting the smallest detail. The disturbed dust upon a windowsill, a smear of mud on the runner, the faint odor of tobacco where none should linger. It was in the It's meant to mislead us, exactement, to direct suspicion where it does not belong. But, even in misdirection, the guilty one betrays himself. He stooped again, noting the faint smear upon the carpet, the trail of wax upon the runner. See, Hastings, it was carried here, perhaps from the library itself, but by whom? And why here by the gallery? Poirot's eyes narrowed. We must inquire, yes, but carefully. For if the murderer sees we are not deceived, he may strike again. When the household convened at breakfast, the atmosphere was one of subdued dread. The storm still raged. The constables had not yet arrived. The roads, the butler explained, were washed to mire and near impassable, and each of the guests wore the pallor of sleeplessness. Lady Eleanor appeared in morning black, her eyes rimmed with fatigue, but her bearing proud and icy. Charles was haggard, his hands unsteady as he poured coffee, his eyes darting constantly toward Poirot. Beatrice looked pale and wan, her shawl drawn tightly about her shoulders. The colonel, more disheveled than usual, drank deeply of whiskey though the hour was early, while Dr. Vale ate sparingly, her expression unreadable. Poirot allowed them to eat in uneasy silence before he cleared his throat delicately. Mes amis, I regret that the constabulary has not yet braved the storm. Thus it falls to us to preserve clarity, order, and truth. And already the night has yielded a little discovery. He placed the candlestick upon the table, wrapped in his handkerchief. A ripple of unease passed through the company. Found, messieurs et mesdames, in the west gallery, stained with blood. Voila, the supposed weapon. Lady Eleanor's eyes flashed. Supposed, Monsieur Poirot? Indeed, madame. For while it bears the appearance of guilt, it is too conveniently placed, too readily found. The murderer, he seeks to deceive us. But Hercule Poirot, he is not so easily misled. Charles leaned forward, his voice hoarse. Are you accusing one of us of planting it? Poirot's mustaches twitched. The footprints in the courtyard. The curious timing of the boom and the scream. Piece by piece, the tapestry forms. But which of you will find himself entangled within it? Later that morning, Poirot requested that each of the company accompany him to the courtyard once more. The rain had lessened, though the fountain still pulsed with its hollow resonance. Poirot paced the flagstones, examining the mud, the faint footprints, the disturbed gravel. Le Gaudet, Hastings. Here, the prints of a heavy boot, leading toward the archway. They are blurred by rain, but distinct enough. And here, lighter steps turning back. Two sets, perhaps the pursuer and the pursued. He bent beside the fountain, touching the bronze basin. And here, feel. The resonance lingers even now. That is why the boom deceives. It reverberates so that one cannot be certain when it began. Did Sir Reginald fall before the scream, or after? The order of sound, it may not be what it seemed. Hastings shook his head. It's devilish clever, Poirot, but I can't make sense of it. Surely the scream came after the blow? Perhaps, Hastings. Or perhaps it came before, the scream of surprise, of fear, before the fatal strike. The murderer, he has timed his act to the confusion of the storm and the drum. Poirot straightened, his eyes sweeping the windows that overlooked the courtyard. And note, Hastings, each chamber here, it has a view. Any could observe the fountain, any could descend unseen. Yet one among them did so, and left Sir Reginald to die upon the stones. Returning indoors, Poirot retired briefly to the library, where he laid out upon the desk the objects thus far collected. The scrap of velvet, the candlestick, a muddy handkerchief found near the gallery, and a single brass button, tarnished, discovered near the fountain's edge. He regarded them silently, then murmured, "Ah, Hastings, how they lie to us, the valley. Their color the ashen shade of morning veils." The rain had softened from a lashing tempest to a steady drizzle. Yet the air was heavy with damp, and the roads, so the butler reported, remained all but impassable. The constabulary, it seemed, would not reach the manor before evening. Thus the burden of order, of inquiry, and of justice rested still upon Hercule Poirot. He bore it without complaint, indeed with a serenity that seemed almost unnatural in so grim a situation. While the household sat in restless clusters, their conversation faltering and their eyes shifting warily toward one another, Poirot occupied himself with small, precise movements, straightening a cushion, polishing his mustaches, aligning a vase with exacting care. Hastings, watching, could scarce contain his impatience. "Dash it, Poirot," he burst out at last. "How can you fuss about flowers when a murderer is loose in the house?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Mon ami, it is by the small order that one conquers the great disorder. The mind, it functions best when symmetry surrounds it. You English, you play cricket to calm yourselves. I align the furniture." Hastings groaned. "Well, I'd rather see you aligning suspects." Poirot's smile deepened. "And that, Hastings, is precisely what I intend. Come, let us resume our little promenade through the truth." The household gathered once more in the drawing-room at Poirot's request. The air was thick with tension. Lady Eleanor sat upright as though upon a throne of ice. Charles paced with nervous energy. Beatrice twisted her hands in her lap. The colonel scowled into his mustaches. And Dr. Vale stood aloof by the window, her spectacles glinting in the wan light. Poirot addressed them with gentle gravity. "Mesdames et messieurs, I thank you for your patience. You will forgive me if I am persistent, but murder, it is a puzzle. And puzzles require patience, order, and repetition. Already I hold in my hand 3 little threads, velvet, brass, and mud. Alone, they are nothing. Together, were worn out of doors in last night's storm. Perhaps to the courtyard." Dr. Vale's mouth tightened, but she said nothing. Poirot turned to the second clue. The button, brass, tarnished, found near the fountain. From what garment does it come? A military tunic, perhaps? The colonel bristled. "What are you implying, sir?" Poirot raised his brows. "I imply nothing, Colonel. I merely observe. You, a man of the regiment, you favor the blazer with brass buttons, no? And yet, how curious. Your jacket this morning, it is missing one upon the cuff." All eyes turned. The colonel flushed deeply. "Lost, dash it all. Buttons come away. It proves nothing." "Mais non, it proves little," Poirot admitted. Yet it adds a thread, a detail. And murder, my friends, it is made of details. Finally, Poirot lifted the handkerchief. The mud-stained kerchief, dropped in haste near the gallery. It bears the initials B.L. A stifled gasp escaped Beatrice, her face blanching. "Yes," she stammered. "It is mine. But I swear, Monsieur Poirot, I lost it yesterday in the afternoon. I searched for it. I could not find it. Someone must have taken it." Poirot regarded her kindly. "Perhaps, mademoiselle. Or perhaps it fell as you passed through the gallery last night?" Beatrice shook her head vehemently, but her trembling fingers betrayed her terror. The room dissolved into a flurry of voices, accusations, denials, protests. Poirot raised his hand for silence. "Mes amis, restraint. We shall not solve this mystery by shouting at one another. Already I see that the murderer, he grows nervous. He plants the candlestick to mislead. He casts suspicion by dropping kerchiefs, by tearing velvet, by scattering buttons. But mark this, the more he scatters, the more certain it becomes that he shall betray himself." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And now, I shall put to you a little test." He drew from his pocket the scrap of velvet, still. "Who had the temperament, the nerve, the precision to strike one perfect blow?" Hastings frowned. "You mean someone cool-headed, not Charles then, he's too hot-blooded. Not Beatrice, she's timid. Eleanor, perhaps, she's icy enough. The Colonel, trained for violence. And Dr. Vale, well, she's clinical, calculating." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "You reason well, Hastings, but beware, the obvious it deceives. Already the murderer has tried to trick us with false clues. He counts upon our haste, but Hercule Poirot, he hastens never." The afternoon waned. The storm broke once more in furious torrents, as though to remind them of its power. Poirot remained composed, his mind weaving the threads together. At last, as dusk fell and the lamps were lit, he summoned the household again. "Mes amis," he said gravely, "the net tightens. Already I perceive the hand that struck the blow. But before I name the murderer, I must verify. By one little experiment." He drew forth the brass button. "Colonel Pembroke, will you oblige me? Show us your blazer." The colonel, muttering, complied. The cuff indeed bore an empty thread. Poirot pressed the button against it. It matched precisely. "Voila," Poirot said softly. "The button betrays you." The colonel swore. "Rot! I lost it days ago. Anyone might have planted it." "Perhaps," Poirot said gently. "But then, who planted the candlestick? Who dropped the handkerchief? Who tore the velvet? Always it is the same. The murderer scatters falsehoods, hoping to confuse. But in scattering so many, he reveals his hand. A hand, how do you say? Too eager, too clumsy." His eyes swept across them all, lingering for a fraction of a second on Dr. Vale, then moving to Eleanor, to Charles, to Beatrice. "The truth, it comes, mes amis. The hollow drum. It shall beat no more without meaning. Tomorrow, when the constabulary arrive, I shall reveal all." The company sat frozen in an unsettled atmosphere. His mustaches gleamed with fresh pomade. His shoes shone, though no servant had polished them. And his cane tapped lightly as he descended the grand staircase. Hastings trailed behind, yawning, his expression harassed. "Another ghastly night, Poirot." Hastings muttered. That infernal drum. I swear it beats inside my very skull. Poirot inclined his head. Just so, Hastings. But take heart. The drum. It is but an echo, a trick of sound. What interests Hercule Poirot is the trick of the mind that accompanies it. You see, my friend, the murderer, he counts upon echoes, both of sound and of psychology. Hastings frowned. Echoes? I don't quite follow. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Patience. All will be revealed in time. But first we must conduct an experiment. Come, let us gather the company. By mid-morning the household was assembled in the courtyard at Poirot's summons. The air was brisk, the flagstones still wet beneath their feet. Lady Eleanor arrived draped in a dark cloak, her face pale but proud. Charles slouched with irritation, his eyes bloodshot from drink. Beatrice clung nervously to her shawl, trembling despite the mildness of the air. The colonel stomped in with military impatience, while Dr. Vale stood aloof, her hands folded, her gaze sharp behind her spectacles. Poirot raised a hand for silence. Mes amis, I thank you for your attendance. You will wonder, perhaps, why I have drawn you from your breakfast to this damp courtyard. The reason is simple. Here lies the key to the riddle. For it is here that the body was discovered. And it is here that the drum beats. As if on cue, a hollow boom reverberated across the valley, rolling like thunder though the skies were clear. Beatrice started violently. Charles muttered a curse. Lady Eleanor's lips tightened. The hollow drum, Poirot said softly. So the villagers name it. A natural echo, caused by the caves beneath this valley. A sound magnified, distorted. The village schoolroom, mon ami. The master was most obliging. Now, attention all. The company arranged themselves. Colonel Pembroke positioned at the gallery window above, Hastings with the small drum by the wall. The others gathered near the fountain. Poirot raised his hand. Colonel, cry out! A sharp bellow rang from the gallery. Poirot dropped his hand. Hastings struck the drum. The two sounds overlapped, the drum's echo rolling back from the valley. The result was uncanny. Some swore the cry came first, others that the drum drowned it, still others that the drum preceded the shout. Do you see? Poirot exclaimed. Even in this simple test we disagree. Imagine then the confusion on a night of storm, of wind, of lightning. A murderer could strike, confident that no witness could swear precisely when the cry was uttered, or even from where. Beatrice gasped. Then, the scream we heard, it might not have been at the same moment as the fatal blow? Just so, mademoiselle. The victim may have cried out long before, or not at all. Perhaps what you heard was but the echo of another sound. The murderer relied upon this deception. He counted on the hollow drum to conceal his act. The revelation cast a new pall upon the group. Charles cursed again, pacing restlessly. Lady Eleanor pressed her lips thin. The colonel muttered angrily about damned theatrics. Dr. Vale alone appeared unmoved, her eyes watchful. Poirot stepped closer to the fountain, his voice dropping to a note of solemnity. Consider, mes amis. The body was found here. But was the murder committed here? Or was it elsewhere? The corpse brought down to the courtyard to confuse us. The echo deceived your ears. Perhaps the staging deceives your eyes. The suggestion struck like a thunderclap. Beatrice whimpered. Charles swore louder. Lady Eleanor gave a sharp laugh, brittle as glass. "You mean, Monsieur Poirot," she said icily, "that the whole thing, the courtyard, the drum, the storm, was contrived?" Poirot bowed. "Madame, the storm will whisper. The tapestry will fall apart." That evening, Poirot requested each suspect to dine together in the great hall. The mood was strained, conversation halting. Poirot presided like a conductor over a discordant orchestra, letting silences deepen, letting glances clash. Halfway through the meal, a hollow boom rolled once more across the valley. Beatrice shrieked. Charles leapt to his feet. Lady Eleanor's glass shattered in her hand. Poirot merely dabbed his lips with his napkin. "You see, mes amis," he said softly, "the drum beats when it will. But it is not the drum that kills. It is man." And as he spoke, he looked, not at the Colonel, not at Charles, nor Beatrice, but at Dr. Vale, who alone did not flinch at the sound. The chapter closed with silence. Poirot's eyes lingered upon the doctor, who returned his gaze with a calm that was, to Hastings at least, more unnerving than any outburst. The echo faded, but its menace lingered. The hollow drum had spoken. And Poirot knew the time for revelation drew near. Chapter 8. The Fraying of Alibis. The night lay thick and suffocating over Hollow Drum Manor. Though the storm had passed, the air retained a clammy heaviness, as though the house itself still breathed the vapors of thunder and rain. In the corridors, footsteps echoed unnaturally. Doors creaked with an insistence that seemed louder than by day. The servants had withdrawn early, whispering nervously of omens and curses, and the house's silence was broken only by the occasional hollow boom from the valley, rolling in long, languid waves like the beat of some monstrous heart. Hercule Poirot, untroubled by the atmosphere, sat at the head of the library table, his fingers forming a small steeple, his gaze steady and brilliant beneath the electric light. Before him sat the household, Lady Eleanor rigid as a marble effigy, Charles slumped in his chair with smoldering eyes, Beatrice pale and trembling, Colonel Pembroke restless with military impatience, and Dr. Margaret head, her eyes cold. "It is." Yet, Poirot continued, "one small detail troubles me. Your chamber, it lies at the north wing, no? And from there you could not possibly have heard the scream in the courtyard, nor the boom of the hollow drum. Yet, when questioned, you swore you heard both." A flicker, barely perceptible, crossed Lady Eleanor's face. "I heard them nonetheless. Perhaps sound carries further than you suppose." "Perhaps," Poirot agreed softly. "Or perhaps, madame, you were not in your chamber but nearer the courtyard, nearer the gallery, where the scream was staged. What say you to that?" Her lips tightened. "I say only that grief and shock may confuse the senses. Nothing more." Poirot inclined his head. "Grief, yes. Confusion, perhaps. But Hercule Poirot, he does not confuse." He shifted his gaze to Charles. "Monsieur le Fils, you confess to anger. You admit to drink. You tell us you wandered the halls until the storm drove you to bed. Yet your boots, they were caked in mud. Mud that could only have come from the courtyard." Charles' face flushed. I stepped outside for air. Yes. After the row. I couldn't bear the atmosphere inside. Poirot's brows rose. Even in the tempest with rain lashing down, you strolled for air? Très curieux. And more curious still, your steps led not merely to the courtyard but to the fountain itself. Did you hope perhaps to drown your rage in water as well as drink? Charles half rose, his fists clenched. Are you accusing me? Poirot's voice remained calm. I accuse nothing. I observe. You placed yourself in the very scene of the crime. Yet you would have us believe you did not commit it. Charles sank back, muttering darkly. Poirot's gaze softened as he turned to Beatrice. Mademoiselle, you say you retired early, pleading illness. Yet, your handkerchief was discovered near the gallery. Mud-stained. My legs. Must a man's every step be accounted for? Poirot's eyes narrowed. Perhaps not every step, but the step that leads to murder, Colonel. That step must be accounted for indeed. And further, your pipe. When Hastings examined it this morning, he found it cold, unsmoked. You claim you sat long at your ease with it, but the ash betrays you. The Colonel's fists clenched upon the table. Are you calling me a liar? I call only what the evidence whispers, Poirot said quietly. At last he turned to Dr. Vale. Her expression was calm, inscrutable, her hands folded neatly. Madame la Doctoresse, Poirot said softly, your account is precise. You claim to have been in your chamber, writing notes upon your medical observations. Your cloak, however, is damp, and from its velvet trim a scrap was torn, the very scrap found in the hand of the victim. Dr. Vale's lips curved in the faintest smile. Yes, you are right, Monsieur Poirot. The cloak is mine. But you err in supposing it condemns me. I wore it yesterday to visit the village. The rain caught me. The branch of a hedge tore it. Later I discarded it in my room. If another hand took it, used it, planted its fragment, how am I to blame? Poirot studied her keenly. An excellent defense, precise, logical. And yet, too logical, as though rehearsed. Her gaze sharpened. A physician learns to argue against death itself, Monsieur Poirot. Do not mistake clarity for guilt. Poirot inclined his head slowly. We shall see. The silence that followed was heavy, electric. The household shifted uneasily, each one sensing the net drawing tighter, yet each still hopeful that suspicion might slip from them to another. Poirot rose, his voice deliberate. Mes amis, you see now, each of you is entangled. Lady Eleanor with her contradiction, Charles with his muddy boots, Beatrice with her lost key and kerchief. Empty save Hastings. Poirot sighed softly and settled back into his chair. Well, Hastings, he murmured, what do you think? Hastings shook his head helplessly. I think they're all dashed suspicious. Eleanor with her lies, Charles with his mud, Beatrice with her handkerchief, the Colonel with his button, and Vale with her cloak. I don't see how you'll ever sort it, Poirot. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, but Hastings, I already have. The murderer, he is like the echo of the hollow drum. He repeats what others say. He scatters noise. But listen closely. Ah, then you hear the one note that is false. and once you hear it, you cannot unhear it. His eyes gleamed with certainty. Tomorrow, Hastings, Hercule Poirot will speak, and the truth, it will ring louder than any drum. Chapter 9. The Gathering of Shadows. The following day dawned with an air of strained expectancy. The skies were iron gray, streaked with the pallor of a reluctant sun. Hollow Drum Manor seemed to hold its breath. Even the servants moved about on tiptoe, their faces pale, their voices hushed, as though fearful of stirring whatever specter lingered in the corridors. Outside, the boom of the hollow drum rolled faintly at intervals, a reminder that nature itself had lent its eerie rhythm to the night of murder. Hercule Poirot, precise as ever, descended to the breakfast room immaculate in gray suit and patent leather shoes. His mustaches were burnished to a sharp perfection, his eyes bright with the tranquility of one who already saw the solution. Hastings, yawning beside him, could hardly match his composure. "Poirot," Hastings muttered, lowering his voice. "You mean to gather them tonight, don't you? For the great reveal?" Poirot dabbed delicately at his lips with a napkin. "Mais oui, mon ami. The murderer. He shall hear the little song of Hercule Poirot, and it will be the last tune he listens to in freedom. But before the gathering, there is work still to be done. We must observe. We must let the pressure build." Pianoforte. The notes stumbled and faltered, as if her very nerves were incapable of order. At one point, Poirot slipped in quietly and observed her. When she realized his presence, she started violently and begged leave to retire. Poirot only bowed and let her pass. Colonel Pembroke attempted to preserve a show of calm in the billiards room, but his shots were erratic, his grip too firm. When Hastings entered casually, the colonel muttered about damned foreigners and meddling in what ought to be a simple matter for the law. His mustaches bristled like an angry terrier. Dr. Vale alone maintained composure. She spent the morning at her writing desk in the salon, calmly penning notes. When approached by Poirot, she looked up with untroubled gaze. "The police will be here by nightfall," she said. "Until then, you play your theater. I dare say you already know whom you mean to accuse." Poirot inclined his head, smiling faintly. "Madame, Hercule Poirot never accuses. He merely reveals. The guilty, they accuse themselves." By late afternoon, the household's nerves were stretched taut as violin strings. The storm had not returned, but clouds massed low and heavy, and the valley echoed sporadically with that uncanny boom. The sound set Beatrice trembling, made Charles curse under his breath, and drove Lady Eleanor to press her hands against her ears. The colonel blustered at it, and Dr. Vale only smiled faintly, as though its rhythm were a metronome to her thoughts. Poirot moved through the house with unhurried calm, checking each clock, each window latch, each lamp. To Hastings, it seemed almost absurd. Why fiddle with such things, Poirot, when the murderer sits under this very roof? Poirot's eyes twinkled. "It is precisely because he sits under this roof that I must be exact, mon ami. At 9 o'clock tonight we gather in the great hall. The lamps must burn evenly, the chairs be placed in order. The psychology, it depends upon such details." "Psychology be hanged," Hastings muttered. "It's all nerves and drama with you." Poirot only chuckled softly. The hour approached. Grim lines. He saluted Poirot mockingly before collapsing into a chair with a snort. Dr. Vale entered last, serene and composed. She took her seat with unhurried grace, folding her hands neatly before her as though awaiting a lecture in a lecture hall. Poirot waited until all were settled. He himself remained standing, hands clasped lightly before him, his head inclined. Hastings lingered at his shoulder, his heart hammering with anticipation. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, "I thank you for your attendance. Tonight we bring to a close the enigma of the hollow drum. Each of you has woven for yourself an alibi. Each alibi, I have shown, contains the little tear, the little hole. You all sit beneath suspicion, yet only one among you is guilty. Tonight, the mask will fall." The room shivered with silence. A log cracked in the hearth. Somewhere in the valley, faint and hollow, the drum boomed once more. Lady Eleanor's voice cut the air like a blade. "Enough of your theater, Monsieur Poirot. If you have an accusation to make it." Poirot bowed slightly. "Patience, madame. The truth, it is like a fine meal. It must be savored course by course, not swallowed in one gulp. Already you have seen how sound deceived you. The cry and the drum intermingling, confusing the hour of death. Already you know how the murderer scattered false clues: velvet, brass, handkerchief, candlestick. But tonight I shall show you the single clue that cannot be false, the one thread that binds the tapestry entire." The company stirred uneasily. Charles muttered something about bloody games. Beatrice whimpered. The colonel scowled, and Dr. Vale's lips curved in faint amusement. Poirot raised his hand. "We will proceed in order. Lady Eleanor, your chamber too far to have heard the cry. Charles, your boots caked with courtyard mud. Beatrice, your key and handkerchief betraying you. Colonel, the button and pipe. Dr. Vale, the torn velvet of your cloak. Each clue damns you." Closed her eyes. Dr. Vale, serene as ever, only folded her hands more neatly. And Poirot, mustaches gleaming, declared, "Tomorrow, mes amis, Hercule Poirot will lay bare the final truth. Tonight, let the murderer think upon his work, and know the end has come." The suspects were dismissed in silence. Each retreated into the depths of the house, burdened with suspicion and dread. Only Hastings lingered, agitated. "Poirot," he burst out, "for heaven's sake, why didn't you name them? You know, don't you?" Poirot's eyes twinkled with solemn amusement. "Mais oui, mon ami, I know. But the murderer must have one last night in freedom. It will be the longest night of their life. And tomorrow, Hastings, tomorrow, the curtain falls." The hollow boom rolled once more across the valley, as though echoing his words. Chapter 10. The Final Drum Beat. The night that followed Poirot's ominous declaration was one of uneasy silences and muted footsteps. The hollow drum manor itself seemed restless, its walls creaking, its chimneys sighing as if the old house knew that the truth hovered close, desperate to be unveiled. Servants whispered in the hallways, their candlesticks trembling in their hands. The guests locked their doors, though to little avail, against the invisible presence of suspicion that stalked the corridors. When morning came, it was a pale, colorless dawn, the kind that seems drained of all warmth. Mist lay heavy upon the valley, and from time to time that strange boom rolled like a muffled heartbeat. Poirot, immaculate as ever, descended to the great hall promptly at 8 o'clock, his patent leather shoes gleaming, his mustache glistening with precision. Hastings awaited him nervously, pacing near the hearth. "Poirot," he burst out, "I barely slept a wink. What if the murderer struck again in the night? What if?" Poirot raised a finger gently, silencing him. "Patience, Hastings. The murderer has had his final night." Lastly, Dr. Vale appeared, as serene as ever, her attire neat, her gaze calm. She moved as though to a lecture hall, not a tribunal of guilt. Poirot looked around at them, his small figure standing tall with an authority none could deny. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began softly, "the moment has arrived. Last night I told you I knew the murderer. Today, before you all, I shall show the truth. No longer will the shadows hold dominion. The drum has beaten its last." He began, as was his custom, with order and method. "First, let us recall the victim, Mr. Alastair Whitcomb, the patron of Hollow Drum Manor, the man who lived in fear of shadows, who locked himself in, who trembled at the booming drum. He was found dead, struck upon the head with the brass candlestick. The hour of his death, that was concealed. The cry we heard was masked by the drumbeat, the storm, the confusion of sound. Thus was the timeline obscured. Clever, n'est-ce pas? Too clever, perhaps." Poirot's eyes swept the table. "Next, the clues. So many clues, so very many. The torn velvet, the muddy boots, the pipe and button, the handkerchief, the key. Each pointed to one of you. Each was designed to sow discord, to scatter suspicion like seeds in the wind. Who planted them? The guilty hand. Who alone could orchestrate such confusion, ensuring that each of you bore a stain of suspicion? Only one who knew your habits, your weaknesses, your tempers." Lady Eleanor's voice rang out sharply. "And whom do you accuse, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot inclined his head gravely. "Patience, madam. Let us proceed with the psychology, for it is there that the truth lies. Lady Eleanor, you, the guardian of pride and reputation, had motive. You feared disgrace if Alastair revealed your debts and indiscretions. Charles, you, the restless heir, resentful of your uncle's control, had motive, for his fortune lay between you. Hearth crackled. A hollow boom echoed faintly across the valley. At last, Poirot raised a finger. "The murderer, mes amis, was none other than Dr. Evelyn Vale." A gasp broke from the company. Beatrice covered her mouth with a cry. Lady Eleanor stiffened in horror. Charles swore violently, and Colonel Pembroke surged to his feet. Dr. Vale alone remained motionless. Her lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "You cannot be serious," Hastings blurted. "Poirot, are you certain?" Poirot's mustaches twitched. "Mais oui. Consider. Dr. Vale had the trust of all. She could move freely in the house, her presence in any chamber unquestioned. She was calm, collected, able to scatter the false clues with scientific precision. Who else could so carefully orchestrate suspicion against each of you? The velvet, cut from her own cloak but placed where it would mislead. The handkerchief, borrowed from Beatrice under pretense, then discarded. The pipe and button, planted from the Colonel's effects. The muddy boots, she placed them outside Charles' chamber. Each clue she scattered like a chemist distributing reagents. But there was one thing she could not disguise: the knowledge of the secret passage. Only she, with her careful exploration of the manor, her keen mind, her scientific curiosity, would have discovered it. And it was through that passage she entered and struck down Alistair Whitcomb. All eyes turned upon Dr. Vale. She did not flinch. "Yes," Poirot said softly. "It was you, madame. You who despised Whitcomb's tyranny, who longed to liberate this house from his iron hand. You who used the drumbeat to mask the hour of death, knowing that none would be able to swear precisely when the fatal blow was struck. You who wove the web of falsehoods. But in the end you betrayed yourself. Do you recall, madame?" Stepped forward, flanked by constables. Dr. Vale rose, serene to the end. "There is no need for force," she said. "I shall go quietly." She turned to Poirot, and for the first time her composure faltered, just for an instant. "You have a terrible gift, Monsieur Poirot. To see too much, to unravel what others would leave hidden. I wonder if the world is kinder for such truth." Poirot bowed slightly. "The world, madame, it is never kind to murder. That is why Hercule Poirot stands always with the truth." Dr. Vale allowed herself to be led away. The others watched in stunned silence, their lives forever altered by the revelation. When the hall had emptied and the constables had gone, Hastings turned to Poirot with a long sigh. "My word, Poirot, you had me in a fever these past days. But tell me, was it truly that slip about the thunder that gave her away?" Poirot smiled gently, stroking his mustache. "It was the detail, mon ami, the little detail that others overlook. Always it is the little gray cells that must work. The murderer, she is clever, but she overlooked the simplest of things. The storm had passed, yet she spoke of thunder. And that, Hastings, was enough." The boom of the hollow drum rolled once more through the valley, echoing like the final beat of a funeral march. Poirot looked toward the window, his gaze distant. "The drum, it beats for the guilty," he murmured. "But now it is silent within this house. Justice has spoken. The enigma, it is ended." And with that, the case of Hercule Poirot and the enigma of the hollow drum was laid to rest.